lot of expulsions before my time, and eventually it got to be a pretty good-sized community. But it was not until 1848 that Jews were allowed to live in Vienna unrestrictedly. And after that time, it got to be a sort of a golden age for Jews in Vienna. The Jewish community grew quite a bit. By the time I was born, 1926, I'll give you a hint. By the time I was born, the Jewish community amounted to 10% of the population of the city. It was a city of like 2 million, so there were 20,000 Jews in Vienna. That's quite a few. And again, just before my generation, it was a sort of a golden age. There were many famous artists, scientists, and so on, who made a mark in Vienna. You probably know a few of the names. The one that jumps out at me is Sigmund Freud. You might know of him. What you might not know, though, is I found that out, is that he was a biblical scholar, in addition to the other problems he raised. For instance, he came up with the idea that Moses was actually an Egyptian, and he deduced it from the name and so on. I'll talk about that some other time. But anyhow, there were others, musicians, Alban Berg, Franz Kafka, and so on. You know, many famous Jews. And as I found out by looking at the encyclopedia a short time ago, about 50% of all the doctors in Vienna at the time were Jewish. Well, that's a lot of Jews. And on top of that, 60% of all the lawyers were Jewish. So that's kind of remarkable, since there was an anti-Jewish sentiment all along, but it wasn't very strong. But it was not, the only restrictions Jews had were really getting into government and into high academic positions. So for that reason, many of the Jews who had ambitions in those directions really wound up converting. So most of the Jews in my early lifetime there lived in what used to be the ghetto. It's one of the districts of Vienna, turned out to be an island in the Danube, a large island, and there were about, let's see, I have a number here. I can't do my handwriting. I'm one of the things. But most of the Jews lived in this one area of Vienna, which used to be the ghetto, was no longer a ghetto when I was there. The lower and middle classes lived in that area. The Jews who really were more affluent lived in the center city or the outskirts. So we lived in the area that used to be the ghetto. So did my grandparents, my maternal grandparents. My father's parents lived in another city outside of Vienna. My grandfather was a tailor. He worked out of his house. My father had a little store where he sold spirits and flavorings. Incidentally, my father was trained as a pharmacist, but he never worked as one. I went to a grade school in that same area. It was about 4 or 5 blocks from the house where I lived. Grade school took 4 years, and we spent 4 years with the same teacher in the same room. Only boys, but it was a separate school for the girls, separate for the boys. I never saw a girl until I was 13 or so. And then I didn't recognize them anymore. At any rate, our school day lasted 8 hours, and all of the same teacher in the same room, never recess, and also half a day Saturday, by the way. But 2 hours a week, a rabbi came in. That's the only religious groups were separated. Catholic, Protestant, and Jews were separated. There was a handful of Jews who were like 10% of the class, so 5 or 6 Jews met with a rabbi for a couple hours, and we learned what? What did we learn? A little bit of reading of Hebrew. We learned to memorize the Shema, and it was the whole thing. And of course, it was a big joke, because during the school day, we were highly regimented and pushed to work and work. When the rabbi came in, it was all fun and games, but nobody paid any attention. So, in the area where I lived, there was really half Ashkenazi, half Sephardi. Never the twain shall meet. There were about 7 synagogues and 100 what they called prayer rooms, where people left observed their services sort of privately. So it was a fairly active Jewish scene. There was a Jewish theater, Jewish schools, a famous Jewish high school was there, a rabbinical school. And again, among all the people, the population was divided into 2 groups, the Orthodox and the totally assimilated. We belonged to the second group. As far as I can remember, my father spent at most 2 days in the synagogue per year, and I was there maybe once. We left just before I was 13. I would have been bar mitzvah at age 13, except that Hitler came along. But there's another story about that. So we were totally assimilated, and so were many others. We lived like the rest of the people in the city, had a fairly easygoing life. And the thing I do remember is that I never experienced anti-Semitism overtly. It struck me much later. When Hitler came in, everything collapsed, of course. And then we experienced a lot more anti-Semitism. And even then, we had some hope. Now, my father was in the Austrian army, so we thought, yeah, we won't be bothered and so on. But it turned out we were bothered, of course. After the so-called Anschluss, by the way, I was there when I was like 12, is where Kristallnacht happened. And I have the distinction of being able to sleep through the whole thing. Of course, in the morning, I heard what was going on. And then slowly the repressive laws became stronger and stronger. There were more restrictions, rationing. Jews were not allowed to go out except certain hours of the day and so on. And by some connections and some miracles, I won't go into details, we were able to get out just in the last second. I get emotional about this. On the day we were supposed to be taken to a concentration camp, we left. We had all the papers in place, and we were able to get out in the last minute. And well, the rest is nothing to do with Germany. But anyhow, we wound up in New York. Spent a short time in New York with one of my aunts. The Hebrew Immigrant Society in New York decided they didn't want all the Jews to wind up in New York, all the immigrants in New York, so they wanted to move to the Midwest. So they made the decision for our family to move to Cincinnati. We got the wrong tickets, the wrong train tickets, wound up in St. Louis. So I grew up the rest of the way in St. Louis, went to high school in St. Louis. And after spending a month or so in grade school in St. Louis, I learned some English. I had a chance to go to one of 2 high schools. One was a highly academic high school, where most of the Jewish kids went that were there. The other one was a less academic high school, where very few Jewish kids went. Well, the advisor in my grade school thought I would do better in the second one because it's not so demanding academically. So I wound up in the less academic high school, and I considered it very fortunate because I was unusual there. I was sent to speech therapy, and I learned to lose most of my accent. And on top of that, I was able to graduate on the top of the class, and the top of the class got half tuition, a scholarship to Washington University, with $50, by the way, which enabled me to go. So, well, the rest is just growing up in St. Louis. The one thing I do want to mention, though, is that I was more aware of anti-Semitism in St. Louis than I was in my early days in Vienna.
Wow.
My father eventually got a job at Anheuser-Busch, famous brewery, you know that, and he was told never to let on he was Jewish. So as a result of that, he always worked on Saturdays, he worked on Yom Kippur, so nobody would find out that he was Jewish. So eventually we wound up here, and the rest is uninteresting history. So I'll leave it all to you. If you have any questions, talk loud, because I don't hear well.
I have a question. We had an exchange student from Austria for 6 months, and we were the first Jewish family she ever met. So was there any Jewish culture that remained in Austria after World War II, or did people just not know about it that weren't Jewish? Like, there was no interest in people that weren't Jewish? Because it was like, she was like shocked to like, she had never seen a temple or met anybody Jewish in Vienna.
I told you I don't hear well.
Okay, we had an exchange student
Yeah,
that lived with us for 6 months, and she was from Vienna.
yeah.
4 years ago, and, no, about 6 years ago, and she had never met anybody Jewish in her life. So was there just like no Jewish, like streets or neighborhoods left in Vienna
There's a
after
Jewish
World War II?
president in Vienna now. We were there about 9 years ago, it turns out. One of my
Mhm.
granddaughters decided I should take them around and show them where I lived and so on. And at that time, there was a resurgent Jewish population in Vienna. A lot of Russian emigres came to Vienna. A lot of Israelis, by the way. There are a couple of Jewish museums in Vienna, and who runs them? Israelis. So there is a Jewish community center. The temple where I would have been bar mitzvah, had I been there, it's still operating, and right next to it, it's a Jewish community agency. They're very active. Many many people have come there to study music, and then there is again a reserved Jewish community. And at that time, there were more kosher restaurants in Vienna than there are in Boston.
Wow.
So it's a small community. As I said before, the Jewish community before the war was 10% of the population. Now it's 0.1% of the population.
So you have to look for it if you're not Jewish, like you would, do something.
And on that, I was, and maybe other people who traveled, I was in Vienna in 2008, in the summer. It was starting to, there was also that feeling that you hear about in France, especially of some insecurity among the Jews. There's many of the synagogues, after the Anschluss and during the Holocaust in Vienna were actually burnt. The main central synagogue wasn't, and it had to do with the fact that, the buildings are all sort of attached buildings, and the synagogue was close to other buildings that they didn't want to burn. But I was there for an academic conference. There was a lot of Jewish studies people there, and we were there for Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. We're all going to walk to a synagogue. The people in Vienna would not walk the streets with a kippah on. They all wore baseball caps and
Really?
things
Okay.
like that. It was stupid Americans and Israelis and stuff who were walking the streets of synagogue with our kippot on. But I remember the security to get into the central synagogue in Vienna was tougher than airport security. We had to bring our passports. Israelis, ex-army people were guarding. We had to go through a metal detector. So and there's what that has to do with is not clear, but there also is a growing Muslim population in Austria as well. So it hasn't, I think, relative to what we're seeing in Germany, and also, by the way, in Ukraine, in Boston, we support the development of the Jewish community. The resurgence hasn't been as strong, I would say, in Vienna, although there still is.
Yeah, I think she was here, was when Michael and Rachel were juniors in high school, so it must have been 2008, 2009, so that would have been around that time. Okay. It's seems like it was yesterday, but it wasn't. Yeah.
Another question? Fred?
So I will show some pictures, and while I am setting up, I was born in Cali, Colombia, which is a somewhat unremarkable city of about 1 million people. And it is somewhat famous for our cartel a few years ago. What's this? No, I can do it from here. There was a cartel there several years ago. Is this not what I did? Let's see. Oh, we did unplug it, all right, not a problem. So, and also, little known fact, some people think that some of the most beautiful women come from Cali, Colombia, but for a number of reasons, I believe that they come from Newton, Mass. If I can turn this.
So what's wrong with me then? So what's wrong with me then?
There's nothing wrong with me though. Hold on a second. We will get this. That's working over there. Okay, there we go.
We think you're pretty good looking.
Oh, thank you.
Men from men from college.
There it is. All right, and the first part of this presentation will be how it is that I ended up in this unremarkable city of about 1 million people. Colombia, in case you do not know, is directly south. You go through Miami, you keep on going, you fly over Cuba, and you end up in Colombia, which is the northwesternmost country in South America. It is the only country, no, I'm not going to say that. There's the Atlantic and there's the Pacific and, region, and Panama used to be part of Colombia till this country in the north decided that they were going to finish the canal, and so they took it by eminent domain, made it into a country. And little known fact, I think, for most of you, is that I believe Panama is the only country in the world that has an air roof completely encircling it. Did you know this?
Wow.
All right, you learned something. Okay. So, let's see if this will work. Yes, that is my great-grandmother over on the left. She is the matriarch. Yeah, you may want to sit over there. She is the matriarch on my mother's side of the family. She gave birth to 3 young girls. The oldest is the one standing in the middle. That's my tante Ilse. My grandfather dated her. And the one over here that's my tante Edith. She was forced to marry somebody. She was in love with somebody else. It was an ugly thing. Later on, she committed suicide, and yes, my grandfather also dated her. And then this one over here is my grandmother, Liselotte, and they grew up in the area of Gotha in Germany, which if you visualize Germany, Nuremberg is more or less in the center. If you go straight north, cross the border into what used to be East Germany, Baden-Baden, does that ring a bell? That's a spa-like area. They used to hang out there. But they grew up in this little town called Gotha, which is about a town of 50,000 or so people. So this is, that's very out of focus. Let's see if we can fix this. Hold on. No, it doesn't get any better. But, I had heard that they had a great life in Gotha. They were part of a high society. They attended social parties. They were affluent and they were totally assimilated in the population there. My grandfather is the man that's reclining on the left, and I think my grandmother's right next to him. I don't know who the other people are, but they're somewhere up in the mountains, obviously. And I love this picture. This is them skiing somewhere. And as those that know us know, skiing runs deep in our blood. 1931. So that was 1931. And that's a picture of them doing their high society thing. On the right is my mother's older brother, Heinz. And it is very traditional in German society. On the first day of school, you get this thing, this cone-like thing. What is it called? Do you remember? You don't know what it's called? Does anybody?
My culture.
Huh? But, okay, so, but it's filled with candy, and it's given to kids when they go to school. And life was good. Okay, I'm gonna stop right there. Whoa, what happened here? Let's go back to there. There we go. Okay, and life was good. Okay, and then right around 1934, my grandfather and his his brother-in-law decided that they did not like where this was headed, and they went exploring to find out where they could move to. One of the places that they ended up in was Colombia, and they ended up in Cali, and they picked Cali because there was a German doctor who said the water was good. And so that's how they ended up there. Around 1936, they left Germany on a boat, the four of them, my great-grandmother, the first picture you saw, and my Tante Ilse and her husband, Uncle Alfred, and they all moved to Cali, where they had a very, very affluent life. In the meantime, my father was born in Vienna, and his family, we later found out, originally emigrated from somewhere in Spain, right around the 1940s, like 1942, they were kicked out, and they grew up in Bulgaria. And his mother, who was apparently high society in Bulgaria, fell in love with my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, and this was not looked well upon. They fled for Vienna, where they grew up, apparently. I don't know how much of the story is true. That's sort of what we heard. But it was not a very happy marriage in terms of the family. What we know is that when my father was 8 or 9 years old, he was put on a train that was headed for Amsterdam, and eventually he ended up in London. That was part of the kinder transport. It was late in the kinder transport history. If you haven't read or seen the movie Into the Arms of Strangers, he's not featured there. He did not want to be part of that, but his very, very good friend Robert Sugar, who he grew up with, actually was there. And my father grew up in a farm. I found this on the internet last night. I did not know this picture existed. That guy in the upper left, that's my dad, probably age 12, 13, 14, thereabouts. From London, they were moved to a farm in Lisle, Northern Ireland. It's on the eastern side of Northern Ireland. It was a small farm. There were 13 kids that grew up with him at that time, most of them orphans. And the story that we heard, again, I don't know if it's true, is that this was a kibbutz, and that this kibbutz